This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Vale Stevens, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 598 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the story and lore of the fantasy video game Elden Ring. And this will include spoilers for everything in the game, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined today by my good friend Matt London, making his 20th appearance on the show. He's the author of the Eighth Continent novels, a series of science fiction eco-adventures, and the interactive novel You Are the Classics Treasure Island. His short fiction appears in The Living Dead 2, Daily Science Fiction, and Space and Time. And he's also worked as a narrative designer on video games such as Hearthstone and Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. And now here's our interview with Matt London. All right, so we're here with Matt London. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be back.
Okay, so how this episode came about is that a few years ago I played most of the way through Elden Ring. And I was interested in it mainly because I saw that George R. R. Martin had worked on the story, and I'm a big George R. R. Martin fan, so that caught my interest. And so yeah, like I said, I played most of the way through the game, but I'm still not sure I could really tell you what the story was. But so then I saw a book just came out called Grace Given, The Mythology of Elden Ring by George Truscott. It's this massive 500-page deep dive into the lore of Elden Ring. And so I thought, oh, well, if I read that, then I will definitely know what the story of Elden Ring was. So I just finished listening to the audiobook of that this morning. And so now my good buddy Matt Lensson is here, who's a big Elden Ring fan. And we're going to kind of compare notes on Elden Ring as an example of a fantasy story.
Yes, well, Elden Ring fan and also video game writer and designer. Yeah. This might be a little relevant.
No, they will have heard your intro going into this. But yeah, but feel free, Matt, to say, well, why don't you just, first of all, just tell us a little bit about your history with Elden Ring?
Sure. So I'm a narrative designer as well as an author by trade. And so what a narrative designer does essentially is, oversees all of the story elements of a video game. That might be the world building, the way that the environments look, the way that the characters look. It also might be like the story of those characters, the things that they say, how they talk, sort of similar to a screenwriter on a movie, right? Which is a big multidisciplinary art project in a way. I had been aware of From Software, which is the studio that made Elden Ring, and their Dark Souls series, as well as some of the other games that they've made. They've made a number of these sort of action RPGs with similar styles of world building and storytelling, similar gameplay. And then Elden Ring notably was their first open world game, where we are dumped into this giant map and you can kind of go anywhere and do anything, and you can do things out of order, or in any order. So I had actually not experienced any of these games firsthand. I'd seen some of them be played, and I'd seen memes and references to them in other games and social media, but hadn't tried it myself. But there was just so much hype around Elden Ring. And obviously, I think maybe similar to you, I've been drawn to the involvement that George R. R. Martin had. I've been a fan of his work for a really long time too. And so I tried it out and was struck immediately by some of the things that felt unique to this game and studio's sort of method of game design. There's a lot of things in Elden Ring that you don't see in similar games made by other studios. The map is very difficult to use. The controls are kind of awkward. There's very little direction. They don't come out and tell you the story. They don't come out and tell you where to go next. There are almost no waypoints on the map, so you don't know where to go. You don't know how to track characters that you've talked to before. There's no way to know if you've completed every part of a dungeon. There's no way to tell how many bosses you have left to fight. There's very few ways to tell whether one weapon is better than another, or in what way, or what enemies are weak or strong against certain types of damage. These are all things that would be very easy to access in a similar game by another studio. But Elden Ring is deliberately obtuse. And that's actually, I think, part of the charm of it, right? Is that it makes you have to figure it out.
Well, let me just jump in and talk about part of the reason that I might not have gotten the story so clearly is because of how I played this game.
Yeah.
And so because I'm such a busy adult with the podcast and everything,
Sure.
I don't have time to really actually like play, quote unquote, a CRPG or an action RPG.
Yeah.
So what I kind of do is if I have something I have to listen to for the podcast, like a bunch of interviews with somebody I'm going to be interviewing, then I kind of play the game at the same time. But like 90% of my attention is on the interview and thinking about what questions I'm going to ask. And then I'm just kind of playing the game with like 10% of my brain and not
so
really...
So you're doomed is what you're saying. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, not really paying super close attention to the dialogue or the menus or like, you know... I never really got into crafting or, you know, the ashes or any of that stuff. I mean, because also I'd never played any of the Dark Souls games before. I heard how incredibly difficult they were. So I was just like, you know, I'm just a George R. R. Martin fan. I just want to kind of get an idea of this. I'm going to just hop into this game and see what it's all about. I'm not expecting to get anywhere in it. You know, so I never really had a strategy for beating the game or anything. I was just kind of noodling around, and I put all my points into whichever stat it is that lets you use better armor and weapons, because I just wanted to see what all the models looked like for all the different armor and weapons and stuff. So but then I just kept playing it and playing it and playing it, and just through just sheer attrition, I made it, you know, all the way up to, as I told Matt, up to the fire giant. I sort of lost my patience at that point, but that's pretty far into the game. I actually just checked. I actually played this game for 266 hours, which is a pretty good sample of the game.
Longer than some novels.
But definitely I got to a point where I was like, I have no idea like where I am at in any of these quests or anything, you know? So, so how does that compare, Matt, with your experience of playing the game?
Well, I think, so I definitely was more focused on the experience. And in fact, I think that Elden Ring and the way that you are allowed to discover content in it, sort of lends itself to having a much more immersive experience. So like on my first playthrough, you know, I'd put the kids to bed, I'd turn off all the lights, I'd sit down in the chair with my noise canceling headphones and just kind of get sucked into this world. And one of the things that I really like about it is that it does kind of feel like this whole world is accessible to you and it is difficult to traverse. And so you feel like you're on a journey as you're traveling through these spaces. And so I kind of let that happen. There was a really useful article that I read sort of the day the game came out, by Jason Schreier, former guest on the podcast, where he was talking about how the way to experience this game is to take a ton of notes and and to not look anything up and to just let the discoveries happen to you. And the thing that he said, I'm paraphrasing, but the thing that he said that I really, really liked, and I think is a really good way to describe the game, is that there's just something new and interesting happening for the first time constantly in this game. And so I really embraced that sense of discovery and wanting to find little things. And it's true. I mean, there's the game's been out now for a few years, so these are little discoveries that might be spoiled. But giant poisonous flowers and bandits on horseback and lakes where the undead are trying to summon a dragon to kill them and send them into permanent hell. There are maidens on the side of the road and treasure chests that teleport you into hellish landscapes, right? There's just and it's constant. Every place you go, everything you do, there's these little things that just surprise you and make you feel like you're almost like you're in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that's come to life. Right?
The description of the game that stuck with me is somebody said it feels like a game that was made by space aliens. Like it's like a game that came from outer space. And that's really how it feels. It's just there's something so otherworldly weird about it. Yeah.
Yes. And what's being able to balance that odd whimsy, uncomfortable whimsy, with a sense of cohesion that stands up to scrutiny, is just an incredibly difficult balancing act. And so I have a lot of admiration for the creators to be able to navigate that, because it is consistent. And I think that in contrast to a lot of games, the consistency is one of the things that makes it feel so complete. Another sort of early thing I experienced outside of the game that really framed my appreciation for it was maybe the first video or second video that a YouTuber named Vatividya made, who's similar to the author of the book, a From Software lore YouTuber, and there's a small fortress at the southern tip of the map, fairly early in the game, called Castle Morn, and he does a walkthrough of that dungeon, and talks about how the story is revealed through your traversal of this dungeon, and so it's like it's a castle, right? And you would think that there'd be there's knights inside and random monsters, and you fight a bunch of random monsters, and then you'd open some treasure chests, and then you'd fight a boss, and then you'd move on to the next castle, like in most games. But in this one, the knights are very specifically the knights that are assigned to this castle, and there are these harpy-like demi-humans that have been enslaved by the lord of the castle, who have rebelled and hung and burned the knights of the castle, and now are running riot within the castle grounds. And there are giant piles of refuse and destroyed furniture and ripped tapestries, soiled tapestries, you're witnessing this slave revolt in progress as you navigate the castle. All of the items that you find inside the chests of this castle are, ancient relics or weapons that belong to the denizens of this place. Everything in it feels connected and whole in order to, as you navigate the space, reveal this story to you. And what's remarkable is that video is really striking because it's sort of stuck in this one little storyline, this one little quest, this one little space. But if you look at every other space in the game, it's all connected and it's all telling these stories, sort of in little bits and pieces that you kind of have to interpret, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about George R. R. Martin's involvement and kind of where this game came from. Right. I don't know how deep you've gone into this, but do you know anything? Do you know anything about George R. R. Martin's involvement?
Yeah.
Beyond?
So From Software has a very distinct style. They've deviated from it a little bit with some of their non-Dark Souls games, like Sekiro and Bloodborne, into more of a sort of like feudal samurai world and more of like an eldritch, like grimdark horror world. But the sort of dark high fantasy of Dark Souls is sort of presented once again in Elden Ring, and is very much in George R. R. Martin's wheelhouse. So he kind of seemed like the perfect person to tap if you wanted to create a world from scratch. What I've heard is that Martin was given carte blanche to create whatever kind of world he wanted to, and then Miyazaki and the developers at From Software took that. It was described as like using an RPG source book to build out the world and construct the game, informed by the lore and world building that George R. R. Martin had put down. I think there was an interview that Martin did where he said that he did everything before the game starts and they did everything after the game starts. I'm not exactly like in practice that seems like incredible. So I'm not sure how much back and forth they had, or how much of the story of Elden Ring as the player experiences it was guided by George R. R. Martin.
Let me tell you what I was able to dig up. So I don't think any of the story as the player experiences it was really guided by George R. R. Martin. I mean, from what I gather, he wrote sort of the history of the ancient history of the world. So you have like, there are these outer gods, which are like Lovecraftian monsters from outer space, basically. And they've been influencing events in this world. And there's these sort of god, like Greek god type demigod characters who have names, and are like a royal family and magicians, and they marry each other and betray each other and murder each other.
A pantheon of demigods who are all causing mischief. Yeah.
And this sort of like political intrigue culminates in an event called the Shattering,
right?
Where there's this superpowered magic ring called the Elden Ring, which defines kind of the rules of reality, and it gets shattered. And my understanding is that George R. R. Martin, like, he didn't write anything that happens after the Shattering. All the stuff he wrote is the Shattering and what comes before it. And at least based on an interview I saw with Miyazaki, it sounds like George R. R. Martin's story was a little bit more like nobles and houses and political intrigue and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the more sort of horrific aspects with like the characters becoming, inhuman monsters and getting corrupted over time and stuff like that. That was the From Software influence.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this convergence of the sort of the more epic fantasy aspects to the backstory are the George R. R. Martin stuff, and the more kind of like horror, corruption kind of aspects are the From Software stuff.
It is it's very tropey in like Dark Souls, for example, to have boss encounters where there's a fallen noble who is suffering in some way, and halfway through the fight they mutilate themselves in order to become more powerful and become this sort of disturbing, monstrous entity. It happens over and over again in the series, and it happens over and over again in Elden Ring. And so there's something I think that makes sense that there it does feel like this convergence of two narrative tropes, right? But there's so much in the game that just feels like George R. R. Martin, not to lean into stereotypes, but duplicity, incest, eating feces, it's all there, right? And I think that there's something kind of cool about that the world does feel more fleshed out than Dark Souls does. I think in no small part because of his involvement.
Yeah, but it seems like he's sort of downplayed his involvement in interviews that I've seen. I mean, he says that he wrote, I don't know how long he spent writing the backstory, but I would imagine not years or anything.
Yeah,
and then the From Software team spent years kind of filling in the details. So
yes. Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, I think it's kind of a marvel how they construct these games. If you know anything about a production pipeline for a big, sort of AAA open world video game, there's dozens of designers in different departments working in parallel to create content for the game. There are designers for bosses. There are designers for enemy AI. There are designers for the camera and navigation and the way that your weapon feels when you swing it. And there are designers for the menus, and there are designers for the items, and and there's narrative designers who will write the descriptions on the items. And it's often much of game development is making sure that all those designers talk to each other to make sure that they're not doing duplicate work, that they're not contradicting one another's work, and that everything is in service of creating a unified game. In Elden Ring, everything is unified. And it almost is like they've used every part of the buffalo, right? There are 6 kinds of magic, or some number of kinds of magic in the game. And there are dragons that you fight in this game that breathe each of those different types of magic, right? It's like, and they exist in the game in locations that make sense to have that kind of breath weapon, right? It's like and that's one tiny little thing. It's all like that. And to me, it's just like the amount of control and conservation of energy required to deliver a product like that is, I mean, as a game developer, remarkable, right?
And speaking of the writing, I mean, a lot of the writing is really good. I mean, It has this sort of archaic quality, this really evocative, archaic quality. So just like one line I wanted to mention, this is just what one of the bosses says before you fight him. He says, "Have it writ upon thy meager grave, felled by King Morgoth, last of all kings." So there's just cool stuff like that. I mean, it's
metal.
Cool. Yeah.
So this is interesting too. From a dialogue scripting perspective, Elden Ring has a teeny, tiny number of voice lines compared to a game of comparable size. There are so few. Fewer quests, fewer bosses that speak. They say fewer things. There are almost no cinematics. Many of the cinematics that you do see are totally silent. And so when you have so few lines, they can all be poetry because you have the time, right? In a game like Assassin's Creed or a Final Fantasy, right, where there's a million lines of dialogue, there's just no time to provide that, to give that level of attention to each one. You'll focus that much on like the biggest, most important cinematic moments, but you can't do it for everything. You just don't have the time.
Let me just, so the one other line I want to mention, which I think is just so beautiful. It'll require a little setup before I get to it.
Yeah.
But so the setup is that there are these 2 princes, I think, named Mohg and Morgoth.
Yeah.
And they're born with this curse called the Omen Curse, where they're basically sort of deformed monsters with arms growing out of them and pustules and stuff like that. And so because of their hideous appearance, they're relegated to a dungeon under the palace called the Shunning Grounds. Mm-hmm. And just parenthetically, a lot of these dungeons and things have just really cool, evocative names like that. But so they react to their plight in different ways. And so Mohg is contacted by one of these outer gods, one of these Lovecraftian monsters called the Formless Mother, which is sort of just this this formless mass of blood and viscera, and it is able to interact with the world wherever like fresh spilled blood is present. So the more blood is spilled, the more influence that this evil god has, and it comes to Moog and sort of seduces him and convinces him that, you know, that he's perfect the way he is, and so he really embraces his cursed form. And then his brother Morgott takes the opposite tack and becomes just a complete defender of the Golden Order, this ruling system that would relegate him to the dungeons, and just will do anything he can to uphold its values and to protect its power structure.
Right.
And so there's this lore text from an object called Remembrance of the Omen King, and it says, though born one of the graceless Omen, Morgott took it upon himself to become the Erdtree's protector. He loved not in return, for he was never loved, but nevertheless love it he did. And that's just some good writing there, in my opinion. Yeah,
there are these dualities are seen throughout the entire game. Like it's a major theme of the game, of light and shadow, of life and death. Not really good and evil, because there's no one that's really good, and everyone who's evil has something about them that's interesting, right? But the idea of duality, maybe even going as deep in metaphor as the two fingers. There are two fingers. You can see that there's just this interesting contrast happening, and you just see that sort of echoed over and over and over again. Whether it's Miquella and Melania, Morgott and Moog, like you said, the two moons with Renala and Rani, Radagon and Marika, of course. There's just so many of these things. Even the Godstitcher twins, right? It's like there are these. It's a major element of the game, and you know, it's wild to me that it just keeps going and going and going. There's so much of this. The sheer volume.
There's enough for a 500-page book, even.
At least. I mean, you know, it like, and what's remarkable is that there's still so much that's open to interpretation. I was listening to the chapter on the Karya family, and the author was delving into his speculation about the estate in the Stargazer ruins, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. That's not my interpretation of this house and this plateau and why it's here, and you know who lived here and how important it was.
Oh yeah, I should say like 80% of this book is pure speculation. You know,
well, I think that it can be informed. And you know, there's like an Elden Ring lore talk subreddit where now years later people are still every day debating some of the more ambiguous aspects of the game. Some of it feels pretty coherent when you really read every item description and watch every cinematic and explore every dungeon, right? And then there are other things that are still just kind of a little bit ambiguous.
No, it's definitely informed, you know, for sure. It's way informed. I'm just saying that it's like, I mean, the author by his own admission is speculating. You know, This is not stuff, you know, like I heard a Gene Wolfe novel described one time as like a jigsaw puzzle where like half the pieces are missing. And so you can kind of like, you can connect some of the pieces, but you're never going to connect, you're never going to complete the whole puzzle, and people are going to argue about what is this actually a picture of, because you know, it's just, there's just these tantalizing bits here and there.
Right. Yeah, I love that part of it, you know. And even major plot points, like what is the Elden Beast is a mystery, you know, and people speculate, and I think some of the theories are really well founded. But there's something so odd and unknowable. Like the game feels like a dream, you know? You wake up in strange places. Characters speak so oddly to you. Like there's a character on the sort of Melania quest chain where you speak to this sage named Gowry who lives in this burned out, abandoned shack. And he never does anything bad to you. He helps you. He sends you on your way. He sells you magic spells. He gives you secrets to progress on your journey. But the guy is creepy as hell. You're constantly scared that he's going to murder you at a moment's notice. He's just creepy and eerie, and it doesn't make sense that he's there, and his motivations are unclear, and so you just feel this sense of unease the whole time.
I guess one thing I'll mention is that there was a lot of cut content in this game, so a lot of quests that had to be cut because either they conflicted with something else or they just didn't have time to finish them or things. And so people have been able to figure out what a lot of this cut content was. And so this book, this Grace Given book that I listened to the audiobook, it goes into a lot of that. And it also goes into this is what the English language translation of this item is, but here's another translation based on the Japanese, which is maybe gives a different suggestion to it or whatever. So yeah, the book is very, very, very thorough. So I also just, though, it is not, if you're planning to get this book, I would just warn you that it is not accessible. I would its strength is that it's comprehensive and its weakness is that it's not accessible.
It's very dense.
Well, yeah, it kind of takes as a starting point that you A, played all the way through Elden Ring, B, remember the name of every character, monster, location in the whole game. It's kind of okay, that's your starting point. Here, we're going to build off of that. And so if you haven't played the game, forget about it. And if me, you played the game, but you were sort of half paying attention, I would strongly recommend Googling every name that is unfamiliar to you, because it's not going to become clear from context as you read.
Yeah, I think that it does lend itself to having an illustrated guide alongside it to kind of jog your memory. And I think from a structural standpoint, I'm not sure if I would have arranged the book the way it's arranged, which really does kind of start from the top of the cosmos and kind of trickle down to individual characters. Because I think I would prefer to focus on the core of the game world and expand out from that. Start with Marika and the Erd Tree, and then go to the demigods, and then go beyond that. And because the outer gods that are sort of creating influence within the lands between, to me are important to understanding the world, game world comprehensively, but not to understanding the hero's journey, right, as they go through the experience.
Yeah. So just to explain, this book is definitely, each chapter is kind of it's arranged thematically. So different characters or organizations or themes might be their own chapter, and then it kind of does a complete deep dive into every theory or detail related to that theme. So you're really deep into the weeds right away in chapter 1. Yeah. Definitely a more accessible approach might have been to start with the basics of the worlds and from the player's point of view and what you find out right away and what's most firmly established, and save the really out there theorizing for later in the book. But the thing is that this book is not written for a general audience. It was an extremely expensive limited edition. The cheapest print version you can get is $280, and it goes up a lot from there depending on the bells and whistles that you want. So it's written for a very hardcore
lore audience.
Hardcore audience, yeah.
Yeah.
But I found once I was about halfway through it, I had sort of connected the dots enough that it became a lot easier. But definitely at the beginning, I was just kind of oh my God, what if I got myself in for? And I still have 19 more hours to go.
It's a big tome, and and there's just a lot to cover. I almost wish I could go back and play the game for the first time, because to me, the thing that's so special about it is that sense of discovery, of not knowing what's around the next corner, and being confronted with each of these obstacles. for the first time.
Well, let me ask you, as someone who was paying more attention than I was, kind of, so you start out the game, and there's this suggestion that you've come back from the dead to embark on this quest to become Elden Lord, and then kind of what was your impression of what was going on as you played through the early stages of the game?
So, yeah, there's this strange aspect to the world building that basically death has become undone as sort of a chain reaction side effect of the shattering that you mentioned before. And so you come back along with basically everybody else. All the humanoids in this game are undead, groaning and stumbling around, with very few exceptions. And
or they kind of feel like they have they're not literally ghosts, but they kind of feel like ghosts.
They feel a little, yeah, exactly. And so I'm confronted. I emerge from my crypt and see this vast vista with all these elements kind of pointing me in different directions. And I think the one thing that I had been told, besides what I've
actually,
mentioned,
let me jump in and just talk about the landscape. It's these rolling hills, like mountains with extremely deep crevasses.
Yeah.
Sort of Gothic medieval fortresses, lots of churches, lots of crypts,
graveyards,
giant swords sticking out of the ground everywhere.
Well, there's ancient stone ruins, right? And what I'd been told was the really cool thing about this game is that if you can see it, you can go to it. And so I started clocking things I wanted to see, and was exploring based on that, right? So I would be confronted with a soldier camp, and I would go inside that soldier camp and try to find my next step, right? Or at least some loot to make me more powerful. And so often in the early going, what would happen is I would confront something that is way too difficult for me to beat. And I'd go, oh, well, it's not like this is Super Mario Brothers where the levels are all linear and 3-2 comes before 3-3. I might just stumble into 3-3 by mistake when I'm at level 1, right? So I would make a note of where things were that I wanted to explore and then go off and try to find my way someplace else. And the game sort of, at the beginning points you towards Stormvale Castle, which is the home of the first shard bearer. And you're supposed to go there and get a shard. You know that, right? And then
a shard of the broken Elden
shard of
ring.
the ring, right? And then you get swiftly murdered by the bridge guard, and then you're sort of sent to this place called the Round Table Hold, where there are other tarnished like you that are also on this quest to restore the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord. And then that sort of gave me a base of operations to upgrade, to pick up quests, and to sort of understand where I'm supposed to go next. But for the most part, it was just like, I understand that the things that are the biggest on the horizon are probably the most important. And I just kind of started trying to make my way around to find everything that I needed to find.
I'll mention too, since I was playing this without the sound because I'm listening to interviews, there would just be absolutely terrifying moments where I'm just minding my own business, riding through the landscape or whatever, and then all of a sudden just I'm dead and there's a giant zombie bear there or a dragon or something, and I did not even know that was nearby, and it was just
that happens even when you are listening to the sound. because it's it's a horror game in a way. There are just these incredibly well-crafted jump scares. Or it's with the bear, he's scratching on a tree and you're looking at him and you're like, he seems intent on something, but then all of a sudden we'll just turn and charge you. Right. That puddle looks red and kind of icky, and suddenly you're poisoned and you're bleeding and you're dying and there's nothing you can do to stop it, and you drink a potion to heal and you're still bleeding and dying and you can't stop it. One of my favorite sort of like bizarre Elden Ring death moments is there are basilisks in this game, and you might not even, because they're really weird looking, these like bug-eyed kind of lizard creatures, and they're small and kind of unassuming, and so they're like flopping around, and so I'm like, what are these things? Are these like the turtles that are benign? And I walk up to one, and it just kind of turns at me and exhales this like black smoke, basically. And I die instantly. It's like, and it's like, it's a basilisk. It makes sense. It death magics you immediately. I'd never been on the receiving end of a spell like that in a video game before. It was so shocking. And there's just, again, it's just like another one of those hundreds of little strange things that just surprise you constantly as you're playing. The lethality of the game is really, I mean, it's just unique, and it's now getting copied more and more by other games. Sort of like the Souls-like genre. But the lethality of it, I think, is one of the things that makes it feel majestic, and that makes the highs of the game feel so high, because it is so punishing, and it makes you feel so good to succeed.
Well, it sort of occurred to me as I was prepping for this that there's kind of two games at work here, right? There's like the game there's the killing the monsters game, and then there's the piecing together the backstory of this world game. And, I think most players will play the killing the monsters game. And then it's like the YouTubers and the really hardcore people will also get into the piecing together the backstory of this world and figuring out how this world works. But would you say that the killing, that you can basically play this game and just kill all the monsters and not pay that much attention to the quests or the the dialogue or any of that stuff, and have a totally satisfying experience of just action?
Yeah, I think that for some number of players, that is their experience, right? And they like the aesthetics, and they like the vibe, and the monsters look cool, and the environments look cool, and you end up getting cool weapons and armor to use so that you look cool. It can be as simple as that, but I think that like experiencing the world and the environment and traversing the space, that piece of exploration, like even when Dark Souls was not open world, that was still a huge part of the game. And I think that the sort of like core Souls audience has a sort of, it's a major pillar of the game and a major component of what people are drawn to in the game. But yeah, it is both.
So when you were playing, did you feel like you had pieced together like this story with Marika and Radigan and all this kind of stuff?
It's interesting. I'll be honest, I needed a little help to get going. I needed a couple of these videos to be like, there's more here than just like, I wasn't even reading item descriptions when I started, right? There's more here than just the cutscenes, right? I was enjoying it as just an exploration piece and the remarkable vastness of the world. But
let me just explain. I think about 80 to 90% of what can be figured out from the item descriptions. Like that's 100%. A huge, yeah. Or I should say, it absolutely can. It absolutely can. And once that got unlocked for me, it changed everything. And in fact, it was really interesting because I didn't get to be a full-blown detective my first time through, but when the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, came out, I did. I was really dialed into the way that From Software does their storytelling. And so I was able to really piece together the story of that expansion much faster and with more clarity than I had the original game, the base game. And it was awesome. I got to have these shocking reveals and twists and revelations. Really, I was able to discover them for myself.
And in retrospect, I wonder how much of that, not linearity, but explicitness was in the base game that I just wasn't privy to when I played it for the first time. And how much of it is they're getting even better at telling a clear and vivid story with their toolbox, right? And so I'm really eager to see what they come up with next. What's their next game going to be, and how are they going to continue to evolve that toolbox? Right?
Well, yeah. Let's focus on the base game, because the book I just read focused almost exclusively on the base game, and I haven't played Shadow of the Erd Tree at all. But do you feel, and it gets really, really complicated. Like, there's a 500-page book, as I said. Right. But do you feel like you could explain, like, if someone's like, I'm never going to play this game, it's way too hard, I just want to know, like, the highlights, like, what's cool about the story? Yeah. Like, do you feel like you could encapsulate that, or at least start?
Oh yeah, 100%. You want me to do it now?
yeah, go for it.
So, to me, in a lot of ways, From Software games are all about their tentpole bosses, and the cast of characters is sort of comprised of these bosses that you fight. In Elden Ring, so much of the story hinges on Marika, who's sort of the goddess and head of the Golden Order, which is the sort of prevailing, like you said, religious system within the Lands Between. Which is a demi-plane where the whole game takes place. And
actually, let me just throw in one more George R. R. Martin thing. So George R. R. Martin actually named the Lands Between. That's one of his contributions. And I think he named most of these demigod characters.
It wouldn't surprise me at all, because there's a very clear and specific structure to the naming, right?
But it's also just fun. It gets very confusing, because the names like Marika, Mikola, Radigan, Radan.
Oh yeah, it's all M's and R's, right?
What's all specifically? It's all G's, R's, and M's, which are George R. R. Martin's initials. And he says that that's not intentional, but like 90% of the major characters have a name that starts with G, R, or M, which is kind of funny.
It is funny. It's interesting because there's the demigods are sort of in these different categories, and you can kind of organize them by their parents, and the names are sort of linked in that way as well. So Marika is this has ascended to godhood, and she takes oh my gosh, I'll try to remember all these names. She takes Godfrey as her Elden Lord, right? And Godfrey was ostensibly a human, or I guess a tarnished. And they had a child, who then had.
Well, he becomes tarnished. Like she expels him from the Lands Between.
That's later, and he becomes. Yeah, it's so. Anyway, it is very complicated. But the main thing that's kind of interesting about this sort of demigod family is that and I'm spoiling major twists.
Yeah, this is going to be all spoilers.
Marika had a line of children with Godfrey, then transformed into a male demigod named Radigan. Radigan went to war with Liurnia, which is another sort of continent in the Lands Between, but then fell in love with the queen of that land, and married her, and had a line of children, demigods, with Renala, the queen. Then Marika sort of started to fight back into control of the body from Radigan, summoned Radigan back to the Erd Tree, and then they had a line of demigod children as well. Radagon and Marika, two halves of the same whole. That's the thing that just a lot of people are just like, I have no idea what this means. But somehow they're gods. It happened, right?
Well,
Athena sprung out of Zeus's skull, you know?
Yeah, it seems like they must have had two bodies at some points, because one was like ruling in one place and one was married in another place and stuff. But there's somehow there are two aspects of the same being.
Yes.
And one thing that the book goes into that I thought was interesting is that this was apparently inspired by a concept in medieval alchemy called the divine Reebus, where the idea is that basically the perfect being would have male and female aspects because it would want to encompass everything that a human being could be.
Yes.
And the male aspect in medieval alchemy was known as the Red King, and the female was known as the White Queen. And you'll notice that Radigan has red hair and Marika has white hair, so it seems very intentional.
That's interesting. There's a lot of depth. And interestingly, Mikola, who's one of Marika and Radigan's children, himself has a female half, which is I think maybe only alluded to in the base game, but then is explored in much greater detail in the DLC. But that character also has that same duality, and has some of the same aspirations of his mother. Yeah. So it's weird. But like one of the things, so that sort of main thrust of drama in the game is the sort of like, the pantheon of the gods and the core story of these gods. But then there are other things that I just absolutely adore about the story and world building in the game, particularly the magic system and how, like, let's take Liurnia, for example. There's this substance called Glintstone, which is this sort of like blue glowing rock, which seems to be mineable and also kind of sprouts up in these outcroppings throughout the lands. And that you can channel magical energy and sort of manifest magical energy through the rock. And then you see basically every aspect of what would the world be like if there was a magic rock that could, you could use to kill people or heal or whatever. And so you see people mining the rock. You see people fighting over the rock. You see people using the rock so much that it turns their heads into rocks. There's all of this. It really just kind of like stretches out the what if of this magical thing.
One of my favorite details with the Glintstones is that one of the bosses you fight, are like mini bosses, is called like the Dragon Smaragd or something.
Yeah.
And the backstory is that he likes to eat Glintstone sorcerers, but because he's eaten so many of them, the Glintstone has kind of infected him too, and so he's kind of like becoming petrified as well. And you can see all these weird incrustations.
It sort of is growing off of him, and then the breath that he spews is sort of like looks like Glintstone magic. And has the properties of Glintstone magic, in terms of its like from a gameplay side, in terms of how it deals damage to you, what is resistant to it and what's not. So again, it's just like all of the kind of normal gameplay stuff that you would imagine has these deep lore implications that are thought through and laid out. I mean, just really remarkable stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I have my whole list here of all my favorite pieces of Elden Ring lore. So I can go into some of them, or if there's any that you wanted to. Should I start, or do you want to start?
Well, I haven't written a list, Dave, so I'll have to pull it out of my rear. But I'm happy to do it. Go ahead. You go first.
Okay. So the thing I thought was really cool, and this is potentially just wild speculation from what I gather, but I thought this was really cool. But so there's this, when you start off on your quest, there's this gigantic golden glowing tree that's branches stretch over the whole horizon, called the Erd tree. And so the thought is that at some points in the past, the Erd tree was a literal physical tree that bore fruit, and back then everything was great because there was just like so much food. People like didn't even know what to do with it all. It was called the Age of Plenty. And then at some point, some faction burned the Erd tree. And then after it was burned, all that remained was this kind of ghostly version of it. But the religion that had grown up around it said, no, the Erd Tree is just as great as it always was. It's just as it offers just as much sustenance and everything as it ever did. And anyone who doubts that, it's just because you lack faith. If you have faith in the Erd Tree, it's just the same as it ever was. And I thought that was a cool idea. Again, I think it's at least somewhat speculative, but I liked that interpretation of the fundamentalists insist that the Erd Tree, this ghostly version, is just as good as the living tree ever was, even though it's clearly not.
Yeah. It's almost like they're trying to make a statement about religion. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, but it's done, and it's a cool. I don't know. That idea is very evocative to me. The giant ghost tree, because the whole game you're like, what the heck is this tree?
It's
like,
massive,
what is going on here?
And it's so I alluded earlier to these treasure chests that teleport you to random locations. And there's one fairly early in the game where you've, like you said, you've only seen the Erd Tree from a far distance, and it is this sort of, you've never seen a tree this big before. It's awe-inspiring to see how large it is.
You can see it from almost, I think maybe everywhere, or at least almost everywhere.
Pretty
on the
much
surface.
Every spot on the map you can see it. Yeah, but what's wild is you teleport in this treasure chest, you get sent to this location that's very close to the tree. And suddenly it's like, oh, this is a giant tree. It's so big. And that's like it. And also your map suddenly grows. You get flung to this far corner of the map and you see just like, oh my God, this game is so big. It's so big. You don't even realize how big it is the first time that you encounter it. And so, yeah, that like the size and awe that the tree imposes on you is just a really cool aesthetic choice. I also really love that there are like 4 main sort of continents or zones that you visit in this game, and that each one covers a different season, right? And so there's this like sense of progression of the years rolling on. It makes it feel like a long journey, even though each zone is always in their distinct season. Again, just like very subtle visual things that just make you feel like you're in this unique otherworldly place.
Yeah. All right, let me hit a few more items on my list here. So there's a character named General Rodan.
Yeah.
And he was growing in magical power and was growing physically larger all the time, but he didn't want to give up his favorite horse.
Yeah.
So he used this gravity magic to make it so that even though he's a giant, he can still ride his little tiny sized horse. So he's this like giant figure riding around.
The horse does not look happy when you see him underneath the massive man that is General Rodan. It's true.
And then he also used his gravity magic to hold back the stars. So there was like a meteor falling that was going to destroy this city, and he's been holding it in place all these years. And so then when you kill him, then the meteor does fall and blast a giant hole in the earth, enabling you to explore a whole new area. So that I thought was cool. And then also so one of the first big enemies you meet are the trolls, and they're these giant monsters. Some of them are chained up, pulling big carts around the landscape, and they have big like swords or spikes through their chests. But they have these big hollowed out like cavities in their stomachs. And then later in the game, if you get to the fire giant, which I was not able to defeat, but he has this like it's called the face of the fell god. One of these evil outer gods kind of has its face coming out of his stomach, and it opens up its one eye and blasts fire at you. And apparently part of the backstory is that the trolls turned against the fell god, and then they were punished by having his face removed from their stomachs. So that's why they have these huge hollowed out cavities in their stomachs, because that's where the face of the fell god used to be, and is no longer allowed.
Yeah. I'll give you a couple. You want?
Okay. Yeah. So hit me.
You visit this ancient city very late in the game, and there's a secret boss where you can basically travel back in time to when the dragons ruled the lands between. And when you're there, you fight Dragon Lord Placidusax, which is this, massive, multi-headed Tiamat-style dragon. And my favorite thing about it is that there's multiple heads that are like biting at you and breathing fire at you, but there's also a stump where another head would be. And I just love the implications of what happened to that head and what was this dragon like? Like, you're fighting this mutilated, weakened version of this dragon king, right? And he wipes the floor with you, right? There's just something, again, it's just like these little things, little details that make you ask 100 questions. Another one is Miquella's Halig Tree. So there, and again, it's like, this is a massive piece of content. It's so big. It's so important to the lore. One of the demigods is here, and it is very, very easy that you could make your whole way through the game and never know that this place exists. But Miquella has his own Erd tree, kind of tucked away at the top of the map in a little hidden location. And it's like a refuge for it's like the island of misfit toys. All of the enemies there are these neglected misfits, creatures that are out of place, creatures that were exiled from their ancestral homelands, and they've all kind of found their way to the Halig Tree.
He's kind of taken them in as refugees.
He's kind of taken them in as refugees. But then, like, all of the great, like, the thing that's so awesome about the dungeons in From Software games is that there's this promise of what they are, right? And then the thing that went wrong that has destroyed them. And so one of the people that Miquella takes in is his sister Melania, who, like Moog, has been touched by a different outer god, this god of rot, which has infected her and everything she touches with this wasting disease, almost like a leprosy, called the scarlet rot. It's like a bleeding flesh disease. And when he takes her in, it corrupts the roots of the Halig tree. And so now that the whole tree is sinking into this pool of rot. And so you explore this tragic, majestic space, which culminates with you directly facing Melania, who I think most people agree is the most difficult enemy in the game. And just a remarkable fight, a remarkable battle arena, and just a wild dungeon that you sort of, through the statues that you see and the enemies and where they're standing and the items that you pick up, you sort of again, just like every other dungeon in the game, you piece together the story of these characters, the tragedy of this place.
Yeah. Well, let me give listeners the story because it's cool. So
yeah.
So Miquella and Melania are twins, and they were born to Radigan and Marika, who again are two aspects of the same godlike being.
Right.
And because their parents are both the same person, they were born with super god powers. And so Miquella is an incredibly powerful sorcerer, but is cursed to basically never age, to be young,
right,
forever. And then Melania is born with this you mentioned, this scarlet rot disease, this sort of corruption of this evil god from outer space. And so Miquella directs all of his formidable intellect to trying to cure her, and is not able to cure Melania, but is able to invent this thing called unalloyed gold. He creates this unalloyed gold needle that he can insert into her flesh that at least arrests the progression of the scarlet rot. But then when she's battling General Radon, she is not going to defeat him unless she pulls it out and unleashes the scarlet rot. So he ends up getting infected, and she ends up having it completely take her over, and it also infests the landscape where this battle happens. So in the game, you're wandering through this realm called Caelid, where everything's kind of sickly and corrupted, and weird monsters, and even weirder monsters than usual. and growths and stuff, and that's this is all the fallout from this magical battle that happens long ago.
I'll tell you one of my favorite little bits related to this story. So there's a spirit ashes called Clean Rot Knight Finlay. And it summons this Clean Rot Knight. These are, I guess, purified knights of Melania. And there's several of them kind of walking around the sort of ending, the final area of the Halig tree. But it says, Finlay was one of the few survivors of the Battle of Aeonia who, in an unimaginable act of heroism, carried the slumbering demigod Melania all the way back to the Halig tree. She managed the feat alone, fending off all manner of foes along the way. And if you play the game, that is a long-ass walk. So you can imagine dragging this 12-foot tall woman behind you, fighting your way across the entire game. There's a whole game there. So really, really interesting little bits of story like that. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, like, Melania looks so much like Radagon, and Mikola, when you finally meet him, looks so much like Marika. There is, I mean, again, it's like, to me, that just feels like a very Jaime and Cersei kind of thing. Like, that to me feels like the kind of familial combinatorial thing that George R. R. Martin loves to do. Mm-hmm. It's very cool.
All right, so let me mention one more. We're running a little short on time, but I also definitely want to mention, this is cool. So there's a character named Ranni, and she was sort of born into this hierarchy of the Golden Order, but didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And the only way she could escape was to leave her physical body behind. So she engineers this plot where she murders one of the princes, Godwyn, and sort of there's this rune of death that she steals. And usually if you were to carve the rune of death into somebody, it murders both their soul and their body. But she sort of arranges for half of it to be carved into her and half of it to be carved into Godwyn, which has the effect of murdering her body but not her soul, and his soul but not his body. So his body is alive but with no soul inside it, and she's liberated to be this kind of spirit who can wander freely. And that was another kind of cool novel fantasy element that I can't recall ever having seen before.
Yeah, it's Ranni is a funny character because her actions are, questionable at best, and yet she's a fan favorite, and people seem to adore her and would do anything for her, and frequently try to get her ending. And
you become her consort, right? If you get her ending,
exactly. So it's like the sort of the base ending of Elden Ring is that it's the thing that's promised at the beginning of the game. You you restore the Elden Ring, you restore Marika, and you become the Elden Lord, consort to the god, right? Like Godfrey and Radagon before you. With Ranni's ending, she usurps Marika and becomes the god, and you are again Elden Lord consort, but for Ranni instead. And there's this weird thing with the moon. There's a bunch of moons, and Ranni has a moon, and maybe the moon is one of these gods or an avatar of one of these outer gods, and that's the moon that's kind of coming in to take over in place of the Erd Tree in her ending.
But I think at least from what I read, the implication of her ending is that she's sort of trying to create a less controlling order of the gods. Like she's gonna go off into outer space and sort of rule in secret, but it's gonna be she's like a figure like Lucifer from Paradise Lost or something, where she's rebelling against the order of heaven, right, and trying to make things more like a little
interesting comparison. I like that a lot.
More democratic or free will or something like that.
It's kind of funny that that. So Ronnie's quest line is probably the longest and most involved in the game, and there's so much content in it that you would just like huge zones of the game that you would never find or see if you didn't do her quest line, and it's like really easy to miss. Like it's incredible how much gets tucked away into this game, for what's it almost feels like a secret, and yet it's such a huge chunk of content and story too, right? Really interesting.
I'm curious, Matt, with just kind of what it's been like, because like I said, I read this book, but I haven't followed any of the YouTube videos or anything like that. Just kind of what's been your experience of the Elden Ring community and people working as a.
I think it's an awesome community. There's like like most video game communities for single player games. There are speedrunners, there are modders, there are lore hounds, and each is its own kind of thing. I just enjoy it. I'm like struck that how I haven't gotten tired of it, and I find that even though I have this giant backlog of amazing games that I've never played, I basically have played the game every year since it came out. Now, just from start to finish, because I love the journey and I love seeing different, playing through different things and doing things in different orders.
You mentioned
challenging
one YouTuber
myself more. Vatividia, yeah.
Who you might need to spell the first couple letters of that for people to find it.
Vaati, I think Vidya, I think, but he does very high production value lore videos where he'll make basically machinima. So having people puppet characters in the game world to create cinematics that don't exist in the actual game, to retell some of these lore elements. And he also commissions a bunch of art to depict scenes from the lore of the game that aren't presented in the actual game. But like he has like an almost 2-hour long video on Ronnie where he goes through her whole, her childhood. She has this like cast of characters, her like Avengers team that she's working with. One of them's a troll, one of them's a wolf man, one of them's an evil wizard with a fetish, and they all are teamed up together with her on her journey, and then you join the squad kind of at the beginning of her quest line. But he goes into this long, detailed story breaking down not just all of those characters and their origins, but like what was the moon that she encountered, and the story that you told about her leaving her mortal body behind. It goes into great detail on this, and then he has videos for all of these other topics too, kind of telling the story in the same way. And what's interesting with him is that like he obviously is very much inspired by the actual content of the game, but then when he presents the sort of theoretical or interpretation of the lore, he presents it as this is fact, this is what happened, which gives, you can like suspend your disbelief. Some of it is ambiguous, but they're just great stories well told by themselves.
I also wanted to mention another reason to talk about this game now is, well, let's see, there was just another like bonus, or like it's called Elden Ring Night Rain, right? Yeah, it's some sort of multiplayer.
It is.
Like,
so Night Rain is a sort of Elden Ring meets Fortnite co-op multiplayer action game where you and some friends are dropped into the lands between, and you have to frantically race from boss to boss, picking up loot along the way to power yourself up. It's very difficult. It's fun, but the pacing and tone of it, like all the art is the same as Elden Ring. It looks like Elden Ring, but to me, the plodding pace, that sense of exploration, the sense of traversal being hard, those kinds of elements that I think are really core to the vibe that these games give out, Night Rain sort of casts aside in interest of, working for shorter session times, multiplayer, which just it makes it feel different.
Is there any like story or lore, or is it just
more so again, just like the base game, all the new items in that game have unique descriptions that expand on the lore, and then there's instead of you are the Tarnished and you can sort of write whatever story you want for your character, there are distinct characters that you're playing in the different classes in Night Rain, and each of them have a backstory which you get to unravel as you play more as each one of the characters. So it's not really recontextualizing Elden Ring or expanding the lore of Elden Ring, but it's like, here are some new things in the world. Here are new stories in the world of Elden Ring that you can experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of new stories in the world of Elden Ring, then the other sort of newsworthy thing I wanted to touch on is that it's been announced that Alex Garland will be directing a Elden Ring movie.
Yeah.
Alex Garland, I interviewed him years ago. Awesome guy. Annihilation is the only movie I think in like the last 20 years I've seen 3 times in the theater. I just really loved it, and it has like a very obvious sort of like synchronicity between Annihilation and Elden Ring in terms of the cosmic horror.
I hadn't thought of that until just now, but you're absolutely right. It's like themes of that otherworldliness and things being strange and being on a journey and sickness and how it can, manifest unspoken in dialogue, in characters' experiences.
No, totally. And I don't want to get into too many spoilers for Annihilation, but the scene at the end at the lighthouse is like exactly what happens in Elden Ring before a giant boss battle. It's like that's it reminds me of that so much.
Yeah, that's funny, totally.
But
I think Natalie Portman dodge rolls at least once.
But I don't know. I mean, like I love Alex Garland. I'm having a hard time imagining an Elden Ring movie. Like it's kind of making me think of the Warcraft movie, which I thought was kind of a mess in spite of having a really good director attached. So what do you think about like how can they approach this?
I'm eager to go and be surprised. I think the cast for Zelda just got announced. Zelda has a lot of similarities mechanically to Elden Ring. In fact, I think Miyazaki cited Breath of the Wild as a influence on Elden Ring's design. And open world exploration games are hard to put into a 90-minute, 2-hour narrative. So I don't know what they're going to do with it. I feel like it could go in a bunch of different directions. I think that if it is like a cast of Tarnished played by Ryan Gosling and friends, I think the movie might struggle. But if it is more like Annihilation and has that sort of like broodingness to it and danger and eeriness, it could be really unique.
I feel like it can't be the Tarnished fights gods for 90 minutes. Like it's got to be some sort of story in the world of in some corner of Elden Rings, with some characters we never met before or something, like there was actually like some fan speculation. Could I find it? There was some like little bit of history that fans were saying would be good.
Oh, a good plot for a game.
There were some characters. I can't find my note about that, but yeah, there's some. Vike.
Sure.
People. I don't think there's been nothing official about that, but I think fans are just saying like that would be a cool story to. I'll just read it. Vike is an intriguing figure in Elden Ring lore who was close to achieving what the player aims for, reassembling the Elden Ring and becoming Elden Lord before being driven mad by the frenzied flame. That's one of the evil god things, and pursuing a lost love. So that's at least one possibility for what a direction they might go.
Yeah. So maybe it's like they take Vike or a character, an original character similar to Vike, a Tarnished with a personality and his own internal plot, and send him on the quest to restore the Elden Ring. That could be it. It feels like a very big budget. It feels like a very big budget movie. Vatividia has a great video on Vike. And we didn't talk about the Frenzied Flame at all, but that was my first ending, the Frenzied Flame ending, and the reason why I did it,
where you destroy all life in the world.
May chaos take the world. Yes, because I'm playing this game, and to the point I made earlier about Gowry, every NPC I meet, I'm just like, you're a horrible person. Nothing here is worth saving. Why are we trying to restore this place? It's horrible. Everyone's evil. Get me out of here. And so my conclusion was, the solution to this is burn it all to the ground.
I guess we're almost out of time. So maybe the last point I'll bring up here is, how do you feel like this world compares to other fantasy worlds that people have dreamed up, Middle Earth or Westeros or whatever? Where would you rank the Lands Between in that, in that pantheon?
I think it's iconic. I think the elements of it are very memorable. I don't think that it holds up to a lot of scrutiny, because it is this sort of holistic storytelling. It leaves every ounce in the game. It squeezes everything out of the fruit, right? So I don't know how many more stories you could really tell in the Lands Between, because it's a demi-plane. It's this small world with not that many characters. None of the societies are really left unexplored. There's not a lot left. And so I don't think that it would have the staying power of something like Middle Earth, for example, right? Where there's just so many more things that you could do within that world. But, if there's another demiplane with a whole new pantheon of demigods, but the same sort of, magic system or outer gods or rules that govern the land, you could definitely keep stretching it out that way.
There's sort of because it's this sort of, it's almost like a post-apocalyptic. There's no farms. That's the thing that really struck me, is there's no farms. There's no normal people going about their ordinary lives. Everybody's in this nightmare,
right.
Ghost.
There are pastoral villages. They've just been overrun by witches and monsters and stuff, right? There's windmill towns, and there are villages elsewhere, and there are cities, right? But yeah, it's there's not a lot. Again, it's a game, right? In Warcraft, they talk about these grand civilizations, but then when you go into the game, there's one inn, there's one farm, right? Because it's a game, and so it's representative of those countries or cities, but it's not really meant to be one-to-one what the world building implies. There are a lot of things in Elden Ring that make me feel like it really is just that space, and there really are just so few characters in it. But it just, that kind of world I don't think really holds up to a lot of hey, what about scrutiny?
Yeah. But in terms of style,
that's beautiful.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10
for style.
Yeah.
Okay, so Matt, I know you have to go, so I'll let you go. Do you have any just final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I would just say that if you're curious about Elden Ring, and you've never played it or never played a From Software game, it can be super, super intimidating, because there's no difficulty settings. There's not even a pause button in this game. So you really have to embrace the challenge of it. And you have to embrace failure, because you're going to fail a lot as you play it. But I would encourage everyone to try it out, and let that struggle to get your head wrapped around the game be part of the ride. There's so much to discover, and I hope people try it and enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lore is really cool. There's a lot of really cool details that we didn't touch on in this conversation. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you're interested, you could check out this book. Again, it's called Grace Given, The Mythology of Elden Ring by George Truscott. Again, it requires a little bit of Googling if you don't have every character name on the tip of your tongue, but it is definitely there's a lot of really cool stuff that they came up with for this game that I think any fantasy fan would be interested in checking out. So yeah, it was great talking to you. Let's wrap things up there. So again, we've been speaking with Matt London about Elden Ring. So Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Matt London for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.